This week I had a chance to do breakfast with somebody many of you might know and remember, Jay Richardson, who is a longtime staff member here for 10 years, served in students and also served in our groups ministry. He and I served at Hill Country Bible Church together, and so he was in town. We thought we'd catch up, and while we were talking, he said, you're not going to believe this, but I ran with the Bulls in Pamplona last week or two. I said, you're kidding me. And he's all juiced up about it. I said, send me a pic. And he's got this picture. What's crazy is with the text, he says, that's my daughter on the left. You ran the Bulls with your daughter, right? This is your youth minister in the past. I can't imagine this, right? Can't imagine. He ran the Bulls. He said, Russell, it was the most exhilarating thing in my life. I ran it twice. One day, I got taken out by some guys. But the second day, the crowd split and I got to touch a bull. I got to touch a bull and I'm thinking, man, he just was excited. He said, it was the adrenaline rush of my life. And I was like, you want to know why? You want to know why? Because that's called risk. And this only works out one of two ways. You sit across the table at a breakfast joint saying it was the greatest moment of my life, right? Or I'm visiting you in the hospital where you'll be for the next 3 months. That's the reason it's an adrenaline rush, isn't it? It's an adrenaline rush because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. They're going to release these bulls with massive horns, and you're going to run around in white and red and hoping, right? Not to take the wrong end of one of those rascals. Crazy, risky when you don't know what the outcome is going to be, positive or negative. Today, we're going to talk about risky faith. What's it look like to have a faith that says, I don't know what the outcome is. I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I'm going to trust God and I'm going to trust His promises and I'm willing to be obedient no matter what. If you got your Bibles, turn with me to Daniel chapter 3. There's a story of three fellows who, they are the perfect example of risky faith, the perfect example of what it looks like to trust God, even though we don't know what the outcome is going to be. I'm going to start reading Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. It says this, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now I want to stop there and make sure we're all square. Like this is really in the middle of your Bible, and we got names like Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, and this big honking statue. So here's where we are. Where we are in the story of the Bible is that God had basically inaugurated this nation. He constituted this nation of Israel at Mount Sinai with Moses, and he said, I'm going to give you law, I'm going to give you these commandments, and listen, I want you to follow me, I want you to obey me, I'm going to be your God, I'm going to be your king, I want you to be loyal to this covenant that I am making with you, and you obey these laws and it goes well, blessings will follow. But if you don't obey my law, if you don't follow my covenant, then bad things are going to happen. And this is the big one. I'm going to send you into exile for 70 years. Now, all throughout the Old Testament, the nation of Israel is going to struggle with this. They're going to worship false gods. They're not going to keep the covenant. And we are going to see God be gracious and patient and long-suffering. He's going to do all of that with the nation of Israel. And then finally, he says, listen, my warning has come through. The consequences are going to arrive, and you are going to be sent into exile. Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon is a key player in that. We learn in Daniel chapter 1 that Nebuchadnezzar is going to come and besiege the city. He's going to ransack the temple. He's going to take the gold out of the temple and put it in his own coffers and treasury. And he's also going to take some of the people from Jerusalem and he's going to bring them to Babylon, some of which will be slaves, some of which he'll try to groom to be his next leaders, some of which are just going to have to live there because they have nothing else. So Nebuchadnezzar is this guy, and he, to declare his greatness, because Babylon probably is the superpower at the time, to declare his greatness, he says, I'm going to build a big statue, and that statue is going to be 60 cubits. Now, by the time you do the math, because a cubit is about 18 inches, it's a 90-foot high statue. And it's going to be 9 foot wide and it's gold. So this is going to be seen for a really long way, and it is going to be a testament to the power and to the glory of Nebuchadnezzar. And that's what we have to start this chapter. Verse 2. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. I want to dedicate this big, massive statue that is attributed to myself, and I want everyone to show up. And I want you to notice you're going to see a lot of repetition in this story. Matter of fact, this whole list of administration and government officials is going to be repeated multiple times. You're going to get the repetition of instruments here in a second. You're going to get the repetition of the fact that he's the king and he set this tower up. You're going to get the repetition of the fact that everyone is supposed to bow and worship it. Remember, the Bible is written not just as some statement of facts, but there's a literature that's going on, a rhetorical device, if you will, that says, hey, I want you to focus and know that everyone should have been here. I want you to know that Nebuchadnezzar is a narcissist and he wants everyone to worship him. He set it up. He wants everyone to know that everyone should bow, not just a few. And so here Nebuchadnezzar has set up this massive statue and he wants everyone to come, all of the government officials. Verse 3. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Do you see the repetition? He basically just said that in verse 2, but he's wanting to draw your attention. Everyone should be there. And by the way, he's the king and he set it up. Verse 4. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, the psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up." This is how it's going to work. Harold gets out there, blows on his horn, gets everybody's attention, and he said, listen, I'm glad you all showed up today for this amazing event. We are going to dedicate this massive statue to our king, Nebuchadnezzar, who set it up. And the band is going to play, and when the band plays, I need you to bow down and worship. And oh, by the way, here's the deal. This is for all people, all nations, and all languages. This isn't just a Babylonian ritual. This isn't just something for those of us who are kind of born and raised here. This is for every one of you. Every one of you. And he's going to repeat it multiple times. All people, all languages, all nations. So if you are reading your Bible and you know the story, this should come to your mind. But wait a minute. There are Jews there. There are Hebrews there. There are people who are of the nation of Israel. And they know that there are two major commandments, number 1 and 2, that says you should have no other gods before me. And the second one is don't make for yourself an idol or an image. And both of those are being broken right now. And so the author wants you to feel the tension that you are going to have to break two major commands to do this. And we know that there are Jews, Hebrews, Israelites that are there. There's a tension that's building. So the herald says you're going to fall down and worship. Verse 6. But whoever does not fall down to worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. These are your two options. You only have two options. You're going to bow or you're going to burn. That's it. And so you're either going to bow down and worship Nebuchadnezzar and his gods and his statue, or you are going to be thrown into a furnace. Those are your only two options in this deal. As we read it, you can feel the tension that's arising. And then you get verse 7, which just sucks the wind out of the passage. says this, therefore at that time, when all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Everybody. If you're reading it, you should be thinking, no, not everyone. No, not all peoples, not all languages, not everyone bowed down to this. We know that there are Hebrews there that know better. No, this can't be. This isn't the way it's supposed to work. And so as you read it, you get this crazy tension. He says it twice. All the peoples, all the peoples. And it almost ought to just make you think, there was no one that'd be loyal. There was no one that would risk it. No one would be faithful. And you get verse 8. For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. Uh-oh. What do you mean they brought some charges? They brought charges against the Jews. That's who we were worried about. That's what we were thinking. They brought some charges. This gives us a little hope. Verse 9. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever. All right. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music is to fall down and worship the golden image. Right? You can hear it. I mean, it's just like, good grief, you're repeating his words to him, right? Verse 11. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And Nebuchadnezzar's like, yes, get on with it. Why are you here? Verse 12. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now these men, O king, have disregarded you, and they do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. Man, we hate to be the bearer of bad news. We hate to show up here and put a downer on your massive festivities. But listen, there are some guys, and they happen to be close to you. You appointed them. They're officials. They're part of the satraps, prefects, governors, right? That whole list. And they're not bowing down. They're not doing it. Now, some of us are sitting back saying, okay, who in the world is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? And how did they get those names, right? So this is the deal. So we know in Daniel chapter 1, I told you this, that Nebuchadnezzar came into Jerusalem, he ransacked the temple, and he took some people. And some of those people, they just had to come to Babylon because they were going to have no other way to make it. Some of them came out of good stock, great families, like high-ranking families, if you will, of the Jews, of Israel. And they took these guys and they put them in a residency program of Babylon. And they said, we're going to teach you our language and our custom and all of our ways. We're even going to put you on a Babylonian diet because we want to raise you up to be special people here. And before they were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because they gave them Babylonian names, they had Hebrew names, which were Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. And there was a fourth one in there. Remember him? Daniel, and they called Daniel Belshazzar. And he drew the short end of the stick on a name, didn't he? And so you got those four guys, and they're all together. And in Daniel 1 and 2, it says, listen, we appreciate what you've done for us, but we're not going to eat the king's meat. Trust us on this. We're not going to eat the king's meat. We're not going to do his diet. We're going to do it the way we want to do it. And at the end of some time, you look at us, and if we stand up against the rest of the guys in the residency, hopefully you'll cut us a little slack. And sure enough, there was favor there. They looked better than the rest. And so as they went through the ranks, Nebuchadnezzar found favor on them, and he appointed them as officials, reminiscent of Joseph as he took charge. So we have now Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who have been taken in by the king, who have been showed kindness and favor to do their own diet, who have been trained in every way, shape, and form in Babylon, and have been shown this kindness and said, now you're going to be an official, you're going to be an administrator, you're going to be a higher up. You would think the least that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could do is to return the favor and say, thank you, King, for all your kindness to us. The least they could do is just bow down and worship the statue. That's the least they could do. I mean, that just seems like what you would do to a guy who's just been so nice to you all this time. It says this in verse 13, Nebuchadnezzar in rage and anger gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. Verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Is it true? You'd stab me in the back like this? I let you do your own diet. I put you as an official. I could have just put you out there with everybody else, but I put you in my house and you ate off my table and you did my things and I showed you favor. Is it true? You can't just bow down. Verse 15. Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trombone, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, very well. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse, right? You're going to get a second chance. You're going to get a second chance. I like you guys. I've invested a lot in you guys. So here's the deal. We're going to strike up the band one more time. And when the band goes to playing, you're going to bow down. And if you don't, here's what's going to happen. You won't get a third chance. I'm going to throw you in the fire. And oh, by the way, just in case you think you're clinging to some God, there is no one who can rescue you. There's no one who can rescue you. Matter of fact, he's saying this. If your God was worth anything, he would have protected you when I went into Jerusalem and ransacked your temple where you say your God lives. And when I took all the gold and the silver and the artifacts out of it and brought it to Babylon, where was your God then? If your God is so big and so awesome, then why in the world is Jerusalem desolate right now and destroyed and I have all the gold in my coffers? And listen, there's no one who's going to protect you. In other words, I'm the man and you're going to worship me or you're going to die. You're going to die. Two decisions. I'm either going to bow down and compromise, or I'm going to trust in my God no matter what. That's risky, isn't it? It's risky. What do you do? Some of the greatest verses in all the Bible right here. You ready? Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. We're not going to debate with you. I don't have an apologetic for you. I'm not going to sit back and go through the history. I'm not going to tell you about how our God created everything. I'm not going to tell you about the flood and a boat. I'm not going to tell you about, the 10 plagues and splitting the Red Sea. I'm not going to tell you about manna from heaven and water from a rock and quail waist high. I'm not going to talk about the walls tumbling down and all the military defeats. I'm not going to talk about David and Goliath or Jonathan and the Philistines or Samson. I'm not going to talk about any of that, even though we got a list a mile long of why we should trust our God. I'm not getting into all that. I don't have time to tell it to you. I'm not here to debate. I said in verse 17, if it be so, if, that's a risk word. If, I don't know the outcome. If, I don't know how this is going to play out. If If it be so, if this is how it's going to go down, bow or burn, if it be so. Our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. He is able. He is absolutely able to rescue us, to save us. He can either extinguish the fire, he can protect us while we're in there, whatever it is, our God is able. We believe that. We absolutely trust in his hand and in his power. Verse 18. But even if, there's another risk word, even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we're not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. We're not going to do it. If. And this is what these three men teach us. We are going to trust in God regardless of the outcome. That's big, isn't it? That's a big deal. Because if I'm guaranteed to not burn, I'm bowing down. Or I'm not bowing down. If I'm not guaranteed, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know the rest of the story. Nebuchadnezzar says, fine, strike up the band. They start playing, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they just stand there. I kind of think they're doing this. I don't know if they are or not, but they're looking at him, and they don't bow. Nebuchadnezzar gets really mad, and in his anger, he says, light up that furnace 7 times hotter, bind these fellas, and throw them in. It's so hot that the guys that are throwing them in, they die. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are in the fire, and a moment later, one of the servants of the king says, hey, I thought you threw 3 guys in there. And he's like, I did. Well, there's 4 in there. And God delivered them. God delivered them. It's an amazing story, an amazing miracle. I love the fact that before they are delivered, they are fine with the outcome either way. Either way. Now, some of you are probably wondering, Russell, let me get this straight. All summer long, we've been in Hebrews chapter 11. And now you're teaching out of Daniel chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's a great point. I'm glad you made it. Let's look at Hebrews 11. Hebrews chapter 11. Start reading in verse 32. We read this verse last week. Let's see if we can make all this make sense from our main passage. It says, and what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and the prophets. Remember, he's gone through Abel and Enoch and Noah. He's gone through Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. He's gone through Moses. He's done Joshua and Rahab. And then he lists these guys off. And we talked about them last week. These are no model citizens. They all had their failures, but God uses them anyway, just like he wants to use us. And then look at what it says in verse 33. Who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire. There's our boys. There's our boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego made it. Hebrews 11, right? They're unnamed, but they made it. They escaped the edge of the sword. From weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Verse 35, women received back their dead by resurrection. The author of Hebrews is like, there's so much stuff I could tell you. I'm just going to give you the highlights. I'm just going to shoot them out here, and you're going to remember the stories. Remember, these are first century Jewish Christians, and they know these names like the back of their hand. When I say something like this, if I were to say, walked on the moon, you're going to say Neil Armstrong, right? If I say won 3 titles and then took a couple of years off to play baseball and won 3 more, who are you going to say? Michael Jordan. If I say the king of pop, you say Michael Jackson, maybe. And so All I have to do is name the feet and you know it. If you're a Jew, you're like, yes, 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 I know those names. For those of us who may not be that familiar with the story, we put them up here easy to see on a slide. Let's just work through them really quickly. I just want you to see some of the names multiple people could be associated with it. Conquered kingdoms, obviously that would be Joshua or King David. They enforced justice. Solomon, the judges, David, Samuel. They obtained promises, like Rahab was saved. Abraham got that promised son, Isaac. Or what about they stopped the mouths of lions, like Daniel or David, when he grabbed it by his beard, it says in Samuel, and saved those lambs. Or they quenched the power of fire. That's our boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They escaped the edge of the sword. That'd be David, Elijah, Eliza, Samson, Gideon. There's a ton of them there. They were made strong out of weakness. All of those folks, which we talked about last week, especially Samson. And then women received back their dead through the resurrection. The widow of Zarephath. What a great story. Elijah being a part of seeing that child come back to life. Or the Shunammite hostess, Elisha, was a part of that. They would have known these stories. They would have said, yes, yes, yes. You might sit back and say, well, Russell, listen, man. You're only telling me a positive outcome here. Who in the world wouldn't have faith if this is the kind of stuff that would follow it? And up until this point, we've read the book of Hebrews 11, and it just seems like splitting the Red Sea and walls coming down and great faith and all of this. But let's go back to verse 35. It says, women received back their dead by resurrection, and others tortured, not accepting their release so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, men of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. Do you notice in verse 35, it went from getting this child back from the dead to torture? And the only word that bridged them together is and. It's like the author of Hebrews is saying, the outcome can be miraculous, or it could be martyrdom. But faith is trusting in God, not the outcome. That's hard, isn't it? I mean, he just so nonchalantly says, and tortured, and sawn in two, and stoned, and, like, give a little explanation here. There's no explanation. The explanation is, I trust God and I trust His promises. I don't trust the desired outcome. Here's the reality. The reality is sanctifying faith says, I can live on either side of the and. Good or bad. Can you say that? Good or bad? It goes exactly the way I hope it does. It goes exactly opposite of how I hope it does. You good either way? Because sanctifying faith says, I'm good on either side of the end. Either one. Now just for a moment, talk for a second of what the enemy to living on either side of the and is. What's the enemy of it? The enemy is obviously that I'm only worried about certain outcomes. And if I get those certain outcomes, then God is good. And if I don't get these certain outcomes, then I got questions. Let's talk about some enemies to this either side of the and. The first one is this. Some of us would say, I know I'm not supposed to worry about the outcomes, but I have lots of faith. I have lots of faith. The quantity of my faith should mean something toward the outcome. And it probably wouldn't take long to find some preachers on TV and some books that would teach that. That if the quantity of my faith is big and a lot, then that should mean the outcome should be the way I want it to be. Let me give you a ridiculous example. It's embarrassing for me to even share it, but I'll share it with you. A couple of months ago, not even a couple of months ago, I was needing to get from South Carolina to Texas. My twins were playing baseball. It was right at the early part of June, and I was trying to watch every last game I could before I needed to be here. They ended up winning, so I had to leave them in South Carolina to finish the season. And so I'm hustling to get from the field to get my bags and then to hop on the road and to drive here. And I get in my car I get in the truck after the game, and my air conditioner was blowing freezing cold before I got out of the car. And then when I got in it after the game, I cranked that thing up, and a mile or two down the road, I'm like, something's not right. My air's not working. And I'm a little panicked because in 30 minutes, I'm fixing to have to drive 13 hours, and all along the route, Siri's saying, excessive heat warning, excessive heat warning. Thank you very much. That's what I needed, right? So I'm sitting back, I get everything squared away. All the time I'm doing this. Lord, please let the air work. Lord, please, I need the air to work. And before I turn it over, I'm sitting in that parking, in this driveway at my buddy's house, and I just muster up all the faith I got. I just need the air to come on and blow cold. Crank it up, and guess what? No cold air. And I have two options in that moment. Option number one is, Russell Johnson, you didn't have enough faith. Or option number two is, God, why do you hate me? Right? That's the danger when we put our faith in our faith instead of our faith in God, regardless of the outcomes. So sometimes we think, if I just have enough, if I just have more, if I just can build up my faith, healing, promotion, success, the air to work. It's dangerous, isn't it? There's another enemy to end. It's not just the quantity of our faith, it's the quality of it. So we come over here and we say, no, it's not just how much faith I have, it's just the quality of my faith. It's stuff like, another example, right? My oldest son's going to Alabama in the fall as a freshman in college, and I've been praying for his roommate for the last several months, just praying. And I could pray like this: oh, Lord, if you would give him a godly Christian man, roommate, they could take Alabama for Jesus. And you would do amazing things through them, and it would be awesome, and things are going to go great, and they're going to win their dorm, and then they're going to win the campus, and then they're going to win the world because... And I make it all about the quality. So what happens when we move him in day one and the roommate's not an on-fire Christian who can't wait to go to church 4 times a week? I either say, I didn't have the right faith, or, God, why don't you love my son? It's dangerous, isn't it? And we do it all the time. We say, oh, Lord, if you'll just give me this promotion, I'll have more money and I can give more to the church, and I'm going to put a pool in and invite the youth over to swim in it. And right? And we put our trust in what? The quantity and the quality of our faith instead of God himself. Lord, if you would just heal the testimony to everyone in that hospital. And that's right. But here's the problem with that. If it only depends on the quantity and the quality of your faith, you just make just rub that genie's bottle and God comes out and says, your wish is my command. Doesn't work like that, does it? You think about it, you might say, well, Russell, how in the world do we do this? How do we have this contentment to live on either side of the and? If you're taking notes, I give you 3 statements here, right? 3 things that I'm continually trying to work on. They're this. The first one is when I acknowledge my needs and my desires and my heart to God, I do that without stipulating an outcome. God, you must do this. You must do this. I can't do that. I just have to acknowledge my needs and my desires, my hopes, but I don't stipulate the outcome. I love Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You can, but if you don't, we're good. Second one. Not only do I acknowledge them without stipulating the outcome, I also acknowledge them understanding God could go either way. He could go either way. Sometimes he rescues and sometimes we burn. Sometimes it's an amazing miracle and God is kind and we look at it and say, thank you for this favor. And then sometimes it doesn't work out the way we want to and we still trust and say, God, you're bigger than all of this. And we know on the other side of eternity it will be right. Third one is this. We acknowledge it without stipulating the outcome. We acknowledge it without understanding that God can move either way. The third one is just saying, no matter what, I am going to have complete and total obedience to you, no matter what. I'm going to trust you, no matter what happens on this side of eternity. And that's a really hard prayer, isn't it? It's really hard. So remember, first century Rome, there's a small community of Jewish Christians who've already endured one set of persecution from an emperor, and there's another one coming down the pipe. His name is Nero, and there's a bunch of people thinking, I don't know if I can go round 2. And the author of Hebrews is saying, yeah, you trust God, not the outcomes. Trust God, not the outcomes. Trust Him. He's good. He rewards. In the end, we win. But here, I got to be good on either side of the and. Remember that list of all those who were tortured? Put a few names with some of those as well. I'll pop it up here on the slide. Some were tortured. That word torture is actually the word for drum. We find it in 2 Maccabees where these brothers were stretched out over a catapult and they were just beaten to death, drummed to death. Jeremiah was chained. Micah stoned with Zechariah. Isaiah, tradition says he was sawn in 2. They killed the prophets. Uriah was one of those, the prophets that were killed by Jezebel. Went about in sheepskins and destitute, wandering. That was Elijah and Elisha. And there is a host more for thousands of years of people who are said, we are good regardless of the outcome. And today, this is my prayer. My prayer is that we would be encouraged to trust Him, even if He doesn't answer it the way we want to. And we would be inspired to have unwavering obedience to that God. Band's going to come out here in a minute. We're going to sing It Is Well. It just doesn't get much better than that song when we think about no matter what. And while we sing It Is Well, you're going to hear the stories of some people who gave their lives for the sake of the gospel. I hope you're inspired. I hope you're encouraged.